What's happening? Adam Drake here, and today I want to talk about the electric clutch system that I run on my Mugen MBX8 Eco Team Edition buggy. I thought I did a video on this, but I looked and I just want to kind of refresh and go through, show the steps needed to be able to install this, talk a little bit about why I use it, and then also talk about the setup that I use when using it. Now, you've seen under the hood videos of my MBX8 Eco, and I always get asked, what's up with the clutch? How does that work? So it's not actually a true clutch system like what you would have on your nitro car. It's actually very similar, but it works quite a bit different. So I'm going to show you a closer look exactly how the unit works. But first I want to talk about what you need to do to be able to install it into your car. So a couple of key things is if you typically run a plastic spur gear, you're going to want to switch to a steel spur gear because the traction drive system has some heat and you don't want to strip the spur gear. Also with the traction drive system, it sits a little bit farther out on the motor shaft, so it doesn't run quite as true as a pinion. It's not something that you really need to be concerned with, but if you use a plastic spur, there's kind of a greater chance that you're going to strip the spur gear. So the first thing you'll want to do is remove the center diff, also take the pinion off the motor, and in order for this system to work, you have to flip the center diff. So on the Mugen car, we have a kind of a center diff or a spur gear cover to make sure that your wires, pretty much any of your electronics, wires, or even when you're reaching in to turn the car on and off, you can't get hit by the spur gear or the pinion gear. So you're going to have to take that center diff cover and cut it into two pieces. And I'll take some close-up pictures and zoom in here in a little bit. But you're going to need to cut that because with the center diff being flipped, the cover won't fit. So once you cut it, you're able to flip the center diff. But when flipping the center diff, the spur gear is going to run into the chassis. So you also have to cut a new slot or position for the spur gear to kind of fit through the chassis. I've seen in the past a few people have made like 3D printed plates that can go under the center diff so that when you flip it, you don't have to actually cut the chassis. But when doing so, it raises the center diff, it changes the bone angle a little bit. So for me, I just go ahead, I drill 2 holes, and then I go ahead and take a cutoff wheel and I just connect those 2 holes, and then I clean it up with a Dremel. If you know someone or have a machine shop locally, they can buzz through and make a new slot really easy for you. But you can kind of do it the old-fashioned way, just drilling a couple holes, cutting a slot with a Dremel if needed. From there, the center diff should just drop into the car. You may have to clean up that hole in the chassis a little bit, but once you have the center diff cover cut and the hole in the chassis, you can flip the center diff. You can then remove the pinion gear from the motor and install the traction drive system. Now, Techno makes this traction drive system. I'm not sure if they still sell it. I've run it for many, many years. I know they didn't sell it for quite a few years, and I believe they brought it back, but I don't know if it's still available. But there's still a bunch of them out there. I think TLR also makes a similar setup. The challenge with the TLR one is you're already really, really tight on space when doing this. And I believe the TLR system is a little bit longer, so I don't think it will fit in most cars. So the one that I use is the one from Techno. I also use the Techno 16-tooth clutch bell. You can use the Robinson bell, and I believe even a Hot Bodies bell, but you're not able to run the Mugen bell when doing this. The diameter and the depth of the bell is a little bit different. But what I do use is the Mugen 754 aluminum clutch shoes from the 3-shoe clutch. But let me go ahead and change the camera angle. We'll take a little bit of a closer look at this, and then I'll go ahead and disassemble this unit so you can see exactly how it works and how it's different from a traditional nitro clutch. Okay, so here you can see how the center diff mount is cut. Again, this is normally a molded piece, but typically, or in the stock form, the spur gear would be sitting in the back because the diff is flipped. So this cover has to be cut, and I just cut it to where it's 2 pieces. You do have to be careful with the routing of your wires and things like that. You want to make sure it stays away from the spur gear. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. Just cut this into 2 pieces. The bottom side, you can see on the chassis, this would be the standard position where the center diff mounts. When you flip it, you have to cut a new hole for the spur gear to sit through. And then you can see here, it's pretty tight or difficult to get the gear mesh perfectly lined up because this unit, the traction drive system, is kind of long. You can use a 8x16x4 bearing on the front side, shim the diff forward, but then you run into a challenge where you have to reshim these center outdrive cups, because if you're shifting the diff 1 millimeter, it's going to make the bone have less play in the front and more in the back, and you could potentially pop the rear bone out. So for me, I'm able to push the traction drive unit as far back as possible, and it lines up like right on the back side of the clutch bell, but I still am able to get full engagement with the spur gear. So just something to kind of look for though when installing that. So now I'm going to go ahead and take apart this traction drive setup here and show you how it works, because guys see the clutch and the first thing they always ask is, you know, how do you have brakes if it has a clutch when you hit the brakes? And that's because it's not like an actual nitro clutch. So when you pull the bell off here, you can see all the shoes are preloaded to be pushed open, and that means that it's always engaged with the bell, which is going to give you brakes still electronically through the speed controller. You don't have to have mechanical brakes like you would on a nitro car. So it does have a very similar look to a nitro clutch, but with a nitro clutch, the springs are made to where it holds the shoes in, and then as you accelerate and the engine builds RPM, the shoes open up. That same thing happens here, except it's always engaged. So you can see that there's tension to try to turn the bell. And as you accelerate, those shoes are still going to push open harder into the bell. But basically what this is doing is working more as like a slipper clutch than an actual true nitro clutch. And the reason why I run this so much is because I run nitro a lot. And a lot of times the nitro tracks get really bumpy. The grip is usually not as high as what it would be for like a 10 scale track, or like an indoor track where you would maybe be running 8 scale electric. And this allows it to have a more similar feel to a nitro car. It's not the same, but it's a lot closer to having that same feeling where the initial hit from the electric motor isn't quite as direct. It has a little bit of slip and give, and then once you're past that kind of initial ramp up, the clutch is fully engaged, it doesn't slip anymore, and you have the full acceleration of your electric car. So just wanted to show a little bit of a closer look of the steps that you need to do, let you know why I run it, and then also explain a little bit how this system works so that you're not driving yourself crazy going, how do you have brakes and how does that system work. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and we will see you in the next video.